Hey there, my name is Mackenzie and welcome to my little corner of the internet, and if you're returning then welcome back. So every year for the holidays I make handmade gifts for my family. I do buy some things, but I try to make them as handmade and original as possible. I just really love making handmade gifts. It's like my love language. It's like a huge part of how I show that I care about somebody. So I will be making like a little mini series here covering the making of my Christmas gifts this year. Today's video we're going to be starting out by making Christmas cards. I'm going to be making 8 of these cards in total, and each one is going to feature a Christmassy sort of scene. So I started out by using Pinterest to kind of collect ideas and just decide kind of where I wanted to go with this. And then from there, I made these little thumbnail sketches just to kind of get an idea of how I want to utilize these. This is always subject to change when I'm actually painting the pieces themselves, but I've actually never done anything quite like this or done paintings for Christmas cards before, so the sizing was a little tricky because I wasn't quite sure how big I wanted these to be. I created a sort of mock-up of like what size card I want to do, and then I also then made a little template for how big I would want the painting to be on the front of the card, and then used that template to create the 8 little mini sketches that I've taped off in my sketchbook, and that's the starting point. I'm going to try to keep these on like the more realistic side because that's usually my style, but I don't want to get too caught up in the tiny details because I don't want this to take 500 years. These cards are going to be like probably kept because they're hand painted. I can't see my family members not keeping them, but I also don't want to spend too much time on them because it's taking time out of the time that I have for making the gifts that these cards are going to be paired with. So I think it's really important that I kind of strike a balance between like detailed and like kind of a little bit looser, a little bit more whimsical maybe. And I don't think I've ever painted something that's going to be this detailed, this small before. I guess my blocks technically are usually about that small, but I just mean in terms of like flat paper paintings. I don't think I've ever painted anything this small before. So of course the details are going to change maybe depending on like as I'm working, if I'm more inspired by something or if I kind of want to make something a little bit easier to paint, if I want to simplify things a little bit. We'll see as we go. I'm naturally a stickler for details, and realism is my main style, so simplifying the details isn't usually my style or something that I lean towards very often, and it wasn't this time either. It was pretty much just as detailed as I normally would be. And so these all took about 2 or 3 days each to complete, instead of like the single one day I planned for each of them to take individually. When it came to these paintings, I did mostly create original pieces with only the use of reference images for scale and angle reference, but because I wasn't going to be mass producing or selling them, I felt more comfortable recreating this one reindeer picture in particular because I just loved it so much. I did take the time to search and properly credit the reindeer farm that originally posted it years ago when it came time to share this painting on my social media. This one took a particularly long time because I wanted to get it as close as possible. When I have a reference image that's right in front of me and I'm essentially recreating it, I'm more likely to really get in on those details and really try to like put in the extra time to make it as close to that image as possible. Whereas when I'm using like a mishmash of different references in order to create something original or new, I'm a lot less likely to be in there doing those tiny little details and making sure everything is accurate because I'm not comparing it to anything specific. I did make a few changes, like removing that third deer, changing the colors a bit, and making the bars thicker. Fur is kind of hard to paint sometimes, so the majority of the time painting this one was spent getting the fur right and the reds built up enough to really pop, which was a continuous issue throughout this whole series. As I've mentioned before with my red paint, it's just not opaque enough, so I do have to make like several layers of different whites and pinks and oranges and reds to get it the way that I want it to look on paper. This painting as well was heavily based off of a pretty famous photo with obvious changes made to the outfit, gifts added, and last minute I decided to add a dog because it just felt like it was missing something. It just felt like the right thing to add, you know? When in doubt, add a dog. I changed the outfit to look more retro as that was the vibe I was going for with this little card series, and also changed the color of her coat from the initial red I had planned to do it to a darker green tone because the amount of red just felt like too much red, and I knew I'd have to make the gifts red too because green presents wouldn't make as much sense and wouldn't scream Christmas the same way. I think when it comes to balancing the red and green elements of these pieces, some suited having more red and others suited more green, but oftentimes I find that more green than red is nicer to look at and more visually pleasing, and this piece was a good example of that. I don't want it to like necessarily scream Christmas for all of them. I do want them to kind of feel that way, but they're going to feel very like snapshots of holiday scenes. So like for example, one of them is going to be kids having a snowball fight. Another is a woman carrying presents like home after she's done her shopping, and she's got like this big stack of presents, that kind of thing. I think the only one that feels truly like extremely Christmassy is the Christmas tree one, that's like you're getting the shot of the Christmas tree from outside the house, like you're looking into the window. This year I wanted to start off making my cards first because that's often the part I forget when prepping my gifts. I've done that this year for several people's birthdays actually, where I focused so much on the gift that I forgot the card, and then I didn't have a card, and it feels weird to not have a card for Christmas or for a birthday or something. Like I don't know, like I guess it doesn't really matter because people just tend to throw the cards out anyway, but because my cards are handmade, they're like an extension of the gift, and I think most people choose to keep the cards that are handmade, or at least I do, so I'm assuming others do as well. I really like to put a lot of effort into my Christmas cards. I like to make them very extravagant and very pretty. They very much are an art piece themselves. So I'm very excited about making those. I'm doing a little bit differently than I have previous years. I think most of the Christmas cards I've done previously have been very simplistic. Still pretty and still cute, but they're just very simple. And that's probably because I wanted to do them as quickly as possible because they were the last thing I was doing rather than like the first thing. So we're reversing that this year, and I'm going to be doing them much more extravagantly. An issue that I have every year is that I tend to have to rush because I don't get things done in time. It's like, actually, that's just the story of my life. I don't know if it's an ADHD thing. I don't know if it's just like a me issue. Like, I don't know. Like, the amount of time that I think that something's gonna take me, it ends up taking longer than that. Usually because either I run into an issue with it, or I run out of supplies, or like there's something that happens, or something just literally takes longer to create than I thought it was going to.
Say, excuse me?
What?
I decided to put around your drawers. Really, really sorry. Randy told me they found a body. Shallow grave. As far as identifying him, the following program is rated 14 plus and may contain coarse language, violence,
Like I genuinely went into it thinking, oh, this should take me like 4 days, and it actually takes like 2 weeks. Even like last Christmas, I got up at like 6 a.m. and I was at the kitchen table finishing my mother's Christmas gift and wrapping it and putting it under the tree before she got up. Like it was done the day of, because I didn't think that that painting of Wiley would take as long as it did, and I had to do it secretly, and because I lived with her, I had to make sure that when I was doing it she wasn't home or she wasn't around and she wasn't going to see what I was working on. And so it was funny because, you know, I really was like, up to the very last second I was working on Christmas gifts. And because we had a major snowstorm last year on Christmas Eve, it meant that we didn't go for Christmas Eve dinner. So a lot of the gifts, like more than one gift that I have for multiple family members, it's like none of them were done yet. They were so close, but they weren't quite there. So it meant that I had a couple more days to work on them because we didn't go until like the 27th, I think it was. We went for family dinner and we did it like late because of the big snowstorm. Long story short, I'm just so tired of like rushing around Christmas time to get everything done. Last year I didn't do any art commissions that year. Like the previous year I did, it was all I did, but that meant that I didn't have time to work on gifts for my own family members, and I didn't have anything to really give come Christmas. And I know that's not the point of Christmas, but it is a big deal to me. And so last year I instead didn't do any commissions at all so that I could make room for doing gifts for my family. But then some of those gifts just took longer than expected, or they were more complicated than I thought they would be, and in the end I was rushing and I was so stressed. Like I swear the amount of stress I had in the 2 weeks leading up to Christmas probably aged me by like a decade. And so I don't want that to be how Christmas is this year for me, but I have more family members to give to this year, so it's like I have even more to think about. Starting in October I started thinking about Christmas. I don't know what happened, it became like a hyper fixation for the entirety of October. And of course by the time we're actually at the point where I should be starting making these things, my brain is like, actually, you know what? I'm not as interested in that anymore. I actually have other things I want to hyperfixate on instead, because that's just the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. But I started planning in October for all the gifts I was going to give everyone and making sure that I had a plan. I had a game plan for everything. And then I also started ordering materials. I tried really hard not to buy a lot this year because, first of all, I have so much art supplies, dude. I have so much shit from like the last, actually like 2 decades of my life. Like there's some things I have in my art supplies closet that I swear to God I've had for 15 years or so at this point, that I've never taken out of the packaging. And so a goal for the next 6 months for me, and I think I mentioned this in one of my art journaling videos, is that I want to start like using up all of that, not buying new supplies, but using all the supplies I have until they're gone. I tried really hard to make sure that I wasn't buying anything I didn't need, and so most of what I've bought have been like things I know I'm gonna need. Like I need more glue because I'm almost out, and I need like things like you know, like those hole punchers that like create like patterns and stuff, things like that. Like I'm buying things that are, they're art supplies, they're crafting supplies, but they're going to be used for years and years to come. Like instead of buying more Christmas paper or Christmas pattern scrapbook paper, I'm just gonna make my own. Like things like that. Like anything that I can make myself or I can get creative with, I'm gonna choose to do that. But there were some supplies that I definitely needed because I didn't have them or because anything I had wasn't gonna work. And most of them are things that I will be using for years and years to come. Like they're more like tools rather than crafting supplies like paper and glitter and things like that. So I've just been slowly, just every couple of weeks, just buying a couple of small materials here and there until I have everything, so that come Christmas time, come like late November when I would start making things, I don't need to go into any store ever. I don't need to order anything. Like I know that right now, you know, if I order things, a lot of things are going to be coming in January because everybody's ordering for Christmas gifts and everything gets all backed up and everything like that. So I wanted to avoid that entirely, which is why I started doing things early, gathering materials early. now that the paintings have been completed, they're finished and done, I've taken pictures of them. They can be made into prints because I liked them so much that I've decided I would like to do that. I know it's too late now to sell Christmas prints, but I can do that for next year. So all's well that ends well. Now we're getting into the actual card making part. We're taking these paintings and turning them into cards. So I went through all the scrapbook paper that I have. I don't have a huge selection. I'm kind of regretting not buying like at least paper that's like Christmas colors, because all I have of plain paper is like browns, grays, beiges, like just totally not what I'm looking for, but they'll do because I figured I could maybe make them more Christmassy by creating patterns over top of them with those reds and greens and Christmassy colors that tie into the paintings. So I just grabbed a collection of paper and we're gonna go through and just decide which ones are gonna go for which and then what those patterns are gonna be, and I'm gonna get started on creating those first. So for the patterns, I'm going to be doing a sort of mix of things, I'm thinking. I haven't quite decided exactly what I'm doing for each and every one, but I do have an idea. I have made a list of what kind of imagery I want to include for each card pattern so that I have a starting place and I'm not too disorganized at this stage. I'm going to be using a mix of paint, markers, and pens to create the background. I don't know, it's tough because normally when you have a picture, like a painting, that is the focal point of the card, you kind of don't want to have too much going on with the patterns and things like that in the background. You want to make it a little bit simpler so that it's not too busy visually. So I don't know how well this is gonna work. I'm gonna test it out first and see if I like the way that those paintings look with the patterns before I commit and cut them out and paste them on there. I might have to go with like plain versions of the cards, even though the colors aren't that nice. I do have some washi tape and stuff that I can use to maybe like spruce it up a little bit. We'll see. I'm gonna be playing around with these cards a lot for the next few hours, trying to figure out exactly how I want to do this. These card patterns took 2 days to make, spending all day long each day creating them. This is a great example of what I was talking about earlier when I said that sometimes I underestimate how long something is going to take me to do. I put a lot of effort into the design of the patterns, even though a majority of the card would be covered up by the painting. I didn't have time or the energy to make these patterns on both sides of the cards, so they only made up the front half. I made a few mistakes due to being extremely tired, and I mixed up a few of the paper designs with the wrong patterns, which meant I had to come up with solutions, and honestly didn't have the emotional or mental energy at the time to do that without crying about it first. But I got it sorted, and all's well that ends well. The ballerina card needed to be reinforced with thicker paper on the inside, as the paper used for that one was just very thin, and the rest were made from thicker paper that had a different design on the inside, some of which I didn't like and needed to be covered up with paper that better suited the card design. Once that was settled, I got to gluing the paintings to the front of the cards and weighed them down so that the paintings wouldn't warp or lift at the edges while they were drying. I then spent an ungodly amount of time decorating the insides because I just could not spend all that time and effort on the outsides just to have basic boring insides. I didn't film a lot of that process because my phone was choking on the lack of storage space that it had, but this is what they looked like before I wrote messages in them. The family members I was giving gift cards to had little gift card holders in them that I made myself. To finish off the cards, I added glitter, like old vintage Christmas cards often had, and a lot of the more expensive, unique cards still do. I started off by applying glue and glitter with a little brush to get it exactly where I wanted it without all the mess, but this was taking 500 years I didn't have, so I resorted to the tried and true method of applying glue with a brush where I wanted the glitter and then dumping that glitter in those areas. Of course, once the glue was dry and I got all the unstuck glitter off, I put it all back in its little container so as to not let it all go to waste. I just have no idea what I'm gonna use it for because I bought it specifically for this project, and I gotta be honest, this was a reminder of exactly why I don't have loose glitter and why I don't use it for stuff, because that shit gets absolutely everywhere in cracks and crevices that don't even make any sense, no matter how careful and controlled you are. I then sprayed them with a fixative to hold the glitter in place and left them in the garage for a few hours to air out and settle, and that was it. I also added this cute little mitten clothes hanger decoration to the cat and bird card for my aunt and her family. My nanny had it left over from something she was making a long time ago and gave it to me to use for something, and I knew immediately I wanted to make it a part of one of my Christmas cards, and I thought it suited this one the best. I absolutely love how each and every one of these turned out, and they were definitely worth the time, effort, and a few tears that were shed making them. I've put 6 out of the 7 paintings up on my 4th wall as prints, so if you like any of them enough to want a print of it, the link is in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my little corner of the internet really soon.